The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead as Lisa pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the Sterling Rose, straightening her black apron for what felt like the 100th time that evening. Friday nights were always busy at the restaurant, but tonight was different. Tonight, the entire place had been reserved for some big charity event, and the guests arriving weren't just wealthy. They were the kind of wealthy that made you feel small just by walking past you. Lisa had been working at the Sterling Rose for almost 3 years now. 28 years old, and here she was, still waiting tables while most of her old classmates were climbing corporate ladders or starting families. Not that she minded the work itself. The restaurant was beautiful, the pay was decent, and her boss treated the staff fairly. But sometimes, on nights like this, she couldn't help but wonder if this was all there was. She glanced at the clock. 6:30. The guests were already starting to arrive, and she could hear the excited chatter from the entrance. Women in designer gowns that probably cost more than Lisa's car glided across the marble floor. Men in custom-tailored suits laughed loudly, their expensive watches catching the light. This was going to be a long night. The restaurant had been transformed for the occasion. White roses adorned every table. The usual soft lighting had been dimmed even more, creating an intimate atmosphere. A small stage had been set up near the back wall, and Lisa had heard something about live music and an auction later in the evening. The place looked like something out of a magazine. She made her way to her assigned section, mentally preparing herself for the evening ahead. Working events like this was always a mixed bag. Some wealthy people were incredibly kind and generous. Others treated servers like they were invisible, or worse, like they were somehow less than human. You never knew which kind you'd get until they opened their mouths. Her section included 5 tables, but one in particular caught her attention immediately. Table 7, right in the center of the room. 4 people sat there, 2 couples who had clearly arrived together. Even from across the room, Lisa could sense something about them. The way they held themselves, the way they looked around the restaurant as if they owned it. This was going to be interesting. She took a deep breath and approached with her warmest smile. Customer service wasn't just part of the job. It was a survival skill. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Sterling Rose. My name is Lisa, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. One of the women, a tall blonde with sharp features and diamonds that probably cost more than a house, didn't even look up from her phone. The other woman, slightly older with perfectly styled dark hair, glanced at Lisa briefly before turning back to her conversation. The men were equally dismissive, one checking his watch while the other scrolled through his phone. Lisa waited a moment, her smile never faltering. She'd learned early on that patience was key. Finally, the blonde woman waved her hand in a gesture that seemed to say, "Just get on with it. Can I start you off with some drinks this evening? We have an excellent wine selection, and our sommelier has personally chosen several bottles that pair beautifully with tonight's menu." The dark-haired woman sighed, as if this was the most tedious thing she'd had to endure all day. "I'll have champagne. The French one. Not whatever cheap domestic thing you're trying to push." Lisa nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Of course. We have several French champagnes available. Would you prefer the Veuve Clicquot, the Dom Pérignon, or the Cristal?" "The Cristal, obviously," the woman said, rolling her eyes slightly. The blonde woman finally looked up from her phone. "I'll have the same. And make sure the glasses are properly chilled. Last time I was at a place like this, they served champagne in room-temperature glasses. Completely ruined the experience." "I'll make sure everything is perfect," Lisa assured her, turning to the men. "And for you gentlemen?" They ordered top-shelf whiskey, barely making eye contact with her as they spoke. Lisa wrote down everything carefully, repeated the order back to confirm, and headed toward the bar. As she walked away, she heard one of them laugh and say something she couldn't quite make out, followed by more laughter from the table. She had a sinking feeling it was about her. At the bar, she relayed the drink orders to the bartender, Tom, who had been working at the Sterling Rose even longer than she had. He raised his eyebrows when he heard the order. "Table 7 giving you trouble already? How did you know? 20 years in this business, kid. You develop a 6th sense for difficult tables. Just keep your head down and your smile up. They'll be gone in a few hours." Lisa nodded, watching as Tom carefully prepared the champagne glasses, chilling them with ice before pouring the expensive bubbly. She arranged everything on her tray with practiced precision and made her way back to table 7. As she approached, She could hear them talking loudly about their recent vacation to somewhere in Europe. The blonde woman was describing their yacht in excessive detail, making sure everyone within earshot knew how expensive it was. Lisa carefully placed the champagne glasses in front of the women, then served the whiskey to the men. "Your server will be by shortly to take your dinner orders," she said. "In the meantime, can I bring you anything else?" The blonde woman took a sip of her champagne, made a face, and set the glass down with more force than necessary. "This isn't cold enough." Lisa felt her stomach drop. She'd watched Tom chill those glasses herself. The champagne was perfectly served, but arguing with a customer, especially at an event like this, was never a good idea. "I apologize. Let me get you a fresh glass right away." "See that you do," the woman said dismissively, already turning back to her friends. As Lisa returned to the bar, she felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach. This was going to be one of those nights. Tom took one look at her face and shook his head sympathetically. "Let me guess. Champagne wasn't cold enough? How did you know?" "Because it was perfect and they're looking for something to complain about." "Some people are like that. Makes them feel important." He prepared a fresh glass, this time adding even more chill, though Lisa knew it wouldn't matter. When she returned to the table, the blonde woman took a sip, paused dramatically, and gave a slight nod as if she'd done Lisa a tremendous favor by accepting it. The evening continued in much the same way. Lisa took their dinner orders, enduring their condescending tones and impatient sighs. When she brought out their appetizers, perfectly plated and beautifully presented, one of the men complained that his portion looked smaller than everyone else's, even though they were identical. When she brought their main courses, the dark-haired woman sent hers back because it was too hot, then complained when the replacement wasn't hot enough. Other servers passed by, shooting Lisa sympathetic glances. Everyone could see what was happening. But this was part of the job. You smiled, you apologized, you did whatever you could to make them happy, and you hoped for a decent tip at the end of the night. Though with customers like these, even that wasn't guaranteed. Around 8 o'clock, the restaurant manager, Mr. Peterson, took the microphone at the front of the room. He was a kind man in his 50s who had always treated Lisa with respect. He welcomed everyone to the charity event, talked about the cause they were supporting, and mentioned that there would be entertainment and an auction later in the evening. Lisa stood near the wall of her section, ready to attend to any needs from her tables. She watched the other guests, most of whom seemed genuinely engaged and happy to be there. Then her eyes drifted back to table 7, where all 4 people were on their phones, barely paying attention to the speech. The blonde woman was showing something on her screen to her friend, both of them giggling while Mr. Peterson talked about children in need. Lisa felt a wave of sadness wash over her. Not for herself, but for the fact that some people had so much and appreciated so little. She thought about her own life, the struggles she'd faced, the dreams she'd put on hold. At least she still knew how to appreciate the good things, the small moments, the kindness of strangers. She pushed the thought aside and focused on her work. There were still several hours left in the evening, and table 7 was only getting started. As the evening wore on, Lisa found herself dreading every trip to table 7. What had started as simple rudeness had evolved into something worse. They weren't just dismissive anymore. They were actively cruel, and they seemed to be enjoying it. It started with the snapping. Instead of making eye contact or raising a hand politely like normal people, the blonde woman had started snapping her fingers whenever she wanted Lisa's attention. Sharp, loud snaps that cut through the gentle dinner conversation and made heads turn. Each time it happened, Lisa felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck, but she kept her expression neutral and responded promptly. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" "More water. And this time make sure there's actually ice in it." Lisa looked down at the water glass, which had plenty of ice floating in it. "Of course. Right away." When she returned with a fresh glass, practically overflowing with ice, the woman didn't even acknowledge her, just waved her hand dismissively as if shooing away a fly. The other guests at nearby tables were starting to notice. Lisa could see the uncomfortable glances, the whispered conversations. A kind elderly couple at table 6 gave her a sympathetic smile when she passed by. A businessman at table 8 actually mouthed "I'm sorry" to her when table 7 wasn't looking. Their pity made it somehow worse. Around 9 o'clock, things escalated. Lisa was serving their desserts, moving carefully around the crowded table with a tray of elaborate chocolate creations that the chef had spent hours preparing. As she leaned in to place a plate in front of the blonde woman, someone at the table shifted suddenly, and Lisa's hip brushed against the back of the woman's chair. It was the lightest touch, barely noticeable. The woman recoiled as if she'd been burned. "Oh my God," she exclaimed loudly, her voice carrying across the entire restaurant. "Could you possibly be any clumsier?" The room went quiet. Even the background music seemed to fade. Lisa felt every eye in the restaurant turn toward her. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to?" The woman's voice dripped with disdain. "This is supposed to be a 5-star establishment. I suppose this is the best help they could find these days." One of the men at the table, the one in the expensive suit who'd been drinking whiskey all evening, decided to join in. "Honey, what do you expect? She's probably never even been to a place like this as a guest. How's she supposed to know how to serve properly?" They all laughed. Not polite chuckles, but loud, mean-spirited laughter that seemed designed to humiliate. Lisa stood there, her hands trembling slightly as she held the tray, her face burning with shame. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, to tell them that their money didn't give them the right to treat another human being like this, but she couldn't. Jobs like this weren't easy to find, and she needed the income. "Again, I apologize for any inconvenience," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She finished placing their desserts and turned to leave, but the dark-haired woman wasn't done yet. "Wait," she called out, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "Sweetheart, how old are you?" Lisa turned back, confused. "I'm 28, ma'am." The woman placed a hand over her heart in an exaggerated gesture of pity. 28 and still waiting tables? Oh, you poor thing. Have you ever thought about going back to school? Getting some real skills that might lead to an actual career? The blonde woman nodded enthusiastically. "That's such good advice. I mean, you can't do this forever, right? What's your plan for the future?" They were looking at her expectantly, as if they genuinely cared about her answer. But Lisa could see the mockery in their eyes. They didn't want to help her. They wanted to feel superior, to remind her and everyone listening that they were better than her. "I appreciate your concern," Lisa managed to say, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to form. "Will there be anything else I can get for you?" No, you've done quite enough already," the blonde woman said, waving her away with another dismissive gesture. Lisa walked back to the kitchen, her legs feeling weak. As soon as the door swung shut behind her, she leaned against the wall and took several deep breaths. Her hands were shaking, and she could feel the tears finally starting to spill over. Tom, the bartender, appeared beside her with a glass of water. "Hey, don't let them get to you. They're just miserable people who need to put others down to feel good about themselves." "I know," Lisa whispered. "I know that. But it still hurts. Of course it does. You're human. But you're also stronger than they'll ever be because you don't need to tear others down to feel good about yourself." Chef Rodriguez, a burly man with kind eyes, poked his head out from the kitchen. "You okay, mija? I heard what happened out there. Those people have no class. Money can't buy decency, that's for sure." Lisa wiped her eyes and nodded. "I'm fine, really. Just need a minute." But as she stood there trying to compose herself, she could hear Table 7's laughter still carrying from the dining room. They were probably telling their friends the story, embellishing it, making themselves the heroes who had put an uppity server in her place. Mr. Peterson appeared, his face etched with concern. "Lisa, I'm so sorry about what's happening out there. I've been watching, and their behavior is completely unacceptable. If you want, I can reassign their table to someone else, or I can speak with them directly." Lisa shook her head. "No, it's okay. If you confront them, they'll just complain, maybe leave a bad review. We both know how this works. I can handle it." "You shouldn't have to handle it," Mr. Peterson said firmly. "No one should be treated that way. I know, but it's just a few more hours. I've dealt with worse. That wasn't entirely true. In 3 years at the Sterling Rose, Lisa had encountered plenty of rude customers, but few had been this deliberately cruel. Most people who were difficult were just stressed or having a bad day. But Table 7 seemed to be enjoying themselves, feeding off each other's meanness like it was some kind of sport." She took another deep breath, straightened her apron and pushed back through the door into the dining room, professional smile back in place, shoulders squared, ready to face whatever else the evening had in store. As she made her rounds to her other tables, making sure everyone had what they needed, she tried to focus on the positive, The elderly couple at table 6 left her a lovely compliment, telling her she was doing a wonderful job. The businessman at table 8 deliberately caught her eye and gave her an encouraging nod. Even other servers were going out of their way to support her, taking on small tasks to lighten her load. But every few minutes, she had to return to table 7, and each time was worse than the last. They started making jokes about her appearance, wondering aloud if the restaurant had a dress code for staff or if anyone could just walk in off the street and work here. They critiqued her posture, her voice, even the way she held her serving tray. When she brought their coffee, the dark-haired woman held up the cup to the light, examining it like she was looking for flaws. "Is this cup clean? It looks like there might be a smudge." Lisa looked at the cup, which was spotless. "I can certainly bring you a fresh one if you'd like. I think that would be best. And maybe bring several so I can choose one that meets basic standards of cleanliness." Lisa did as she was asked, returning with 3 different coffee cups on a tray. The woman made a show of examining each one before selecting one with a dramatic sigh, as if this entire ordeal had been incredibly taxing. Throughout all of this, Lisa noticed something interesting. The other guests in the restaurant were starting to react. Not openly, because that wasn't how polite society worked, but she could see it in the way they glanced at table 7 with barely concealed disgust. She could hear snippets of conversation from nearby tables, words like appalling and no class floating through the air. One woman at table 5, dressed in an elegant navy gown, actually got up and walked over to Lisa while she was refilling water glasses. "Excuse me, dear," she said softly. "I just wanted to tell you that you're handling a very difficult situation with remarkable grace. That table should be ashamed of themselves." "Thank you," Lisa said, genuinely touched. "That means a lot. I mean it. True class has nothing to do with money and everything to do with how you treat others. You have it. They don't." As the woman returned to her seat, Lisa felt a small spark of warmth in her chest. Maybe this night wasn't completely terrible. Maybe there were still good people in the world, even in rooms full of wealthy strangers. Around 10 o'clock, Mr. Peterson took the microphone again to announce that the evening's entertainment was about to begin. A pianist was scheduled to perform, followed by the charity auction. Lisa found herself looking forward to it, hoping that the music might distract table 7 and give her a brief reprieve from their attention. But then Mr. Peterson's face fell. He leaned over and whispered something to one of the event organizers, who looked equally distressed. After a hurried conversation, Mr. Peterson returned to the microphone, and Lisa's heart sank at his expression. This wasn't good news. Whatever was about to happen, it was going to make the evening even more complicated. And somehow she had a feeling that table 7 was going to find a way to make it about her. Mr. Peterson stood at the microphone, his usual composure clearly shaken. He cleared his throat once, twice, and then spoke with obvious regret in his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I have some disappointing news. Our scheduled pianist for this evening has fallen ill and won't be able to perform tonight. We're terribly sorry for this inconvenience, and we're working on finding a solution. In the meantime, please enjoy your desserts and coffee, and we'll proceed with the auction shortly." A murmur of disappointment rippled through the crowd. The grand piano sitting in the corner of the restaurant suddenly looked like an abandoned promise, its polished black surface reflecting the chandelier light mockingly. Several guests turned to their companions, expressing their frustration. This was supposed to be a complete experience, and now a key element was missing. But no one was louder in their disappointment than table 7. The blonde woman's voice carried across the entire restaurant, sharp and cutting. "You have got to be kidding me. We paid $500 a plate for this event, and they can't even manage to secure basic entertainment. This is absolutely unacceptable." Her husband nodded in agreement, his face red with indignation. "I've been to charity events at hotel ballrooms that were better organized than this. This is amateur hour." The dark-haired woman joined in, her voice dripping with disdain. "And look at that beautiful piano just sitting there, completely wasted. What a shame. Though I suppose in a place that hires such incompetent staff, we shouldn't be surprised that the management is equally inept." Lisa was standing near the wall, watching Mr. Peterson's distress when that last comment hit her. They were blaming the staff now, extending their cruelty beyond her to everyone who worked at the Sterling Rose. She could see Mr. Peterson's shoulders sag slightly, and something inside her shifted. She'd spent the entire evening being quiet, being professional, taking their abuse with grace. But this wasn't just about her anymore. Mr. Peterson had given her a job when she desperately needed one. He'd been kind and fair, never making her feel less than. The rest of the staff had become like family over the past 3 years. And now these people, these cruel, small-minded people, were attacking all of them. Lisa's hands were trembling, but this time it wasn't from shame or fear. It was from something else entirely. A decision was forming in her mind, one that scared and exhilarated her in equal measure. She could play that piano, not just play it, but really play it. But did she dare? What would happen if she offered and wasn't good enough? What if she made things worse? What if Table 7 found some new way to mock her? But then she thought about her mother, who had passed away 2 years ago. Her mother, who had worked 3 jobs to pay for Lisa's piano lessons and later her education at one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. Her mother, who had always told her that talent was a gift meant to be shared, not hidden away. "You have something special, Mija," her mother would say. "Don't let anyone make you forget that. Don't let the world convince you to play small." Lisa had been playing small for 3 years now. She'd put her dreams on hold when her mother got sick, when the medical bills started piling up, when she needed steady income more than she needed applause. She'd told herself it was temporary, that she'd get back to music eventually, but temporary had turned into 3 years, and she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be more than just a waitress. Before she could talk herself out of it, Lisa walked toward Mr. Peterson, who was standing near the entrance to the kitchen looking defeated. He was on his phone, probably trying to find someone, anyone, who could play the piano on such short notice. "Mr. Peterson," Lisa said quietly, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. He looked up, distracted. "Yes, Lisa, if this is about Table 7, I'm planning to comp their bill. I won't have them saying we didn't try to make things right. That's not why I'm here." Lisa took a deep breath. "I can play the piano. If you want, I could perform tonight." Mr. Peterson blinked at her, clearly not comprehending what she'd just said. "I'm sorry, what? The piano? I can play it. I studied at Berklee College of Music. I can fill in for the pianist who got sick." For a long moment, Mr. Peterson just stared at her. "Lisa, in 3 years of working here, you've never mentioned that you could play piano. Are you sure about this? This is a very particular crowd, and if something goes wrong—" "I'm sure," Lisa said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I can do this." Mr. Peterson looked at her searchingly, and whatever he saw in her expression must have convinced him. He nodded slowly. Okay, if you're certain, then let's do it. Thank you, Lisa, thank you so much." He walked back to the microphone while Lisa stood frozen, suddenly realizing what she'd just committed to. Her hands started shaking again, and she pressed them against her apron to steady them. What had she been thinking? She hadn't performed in front of an audience in years. What if she'd lost her touch? What if her fingers weren't as nimble as they used to be? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these people? But it was too late to back out now. Mr. Peterson was already speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have wonderful news. It turns out we have a talented musician right here among our staff. One of our servers has graciously volunteered to perform for us this evening. Please give her your attention and your appreciation." The announcement was met with polite but skeptical applause. Lisa could see people exchanging doubtful glances. A server, playing at an event like this? The idea seemed almost laughable to them, but no one found it funnier than Table 7. The blonde woman's laugh rang out clearly above the mild applause, sharp and mocking. "Oh, this should be entertaining," she said loudly to her companions. "From spilling water to tickling the ivories. What's next? Is the busboy going to juggle?" Her husband was equally amused. "I give it 30 seconds before she gives up. She probably played chopsticks at a school recital once and thinks that qualifies her." The dark-haired woman shook her head in exaggerated disbelief. "This is what this place considers entertainment? We should have gone to the opera instead. At least there we'd have professionals." Lisa heard every word. She knew they intended for her to hear. Intended to shake her confidence before she even sat down at the piano. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. Some curious, some pitying, some openly skeptical. The kind elderly woman from Table 6 gave her an encouraging smile, but even that felt tinged with doubt. She walked toward the piano, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. With each step, she became more aware of her simple black dress, her practical shoes, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. She looked like exactly what she was, a waitress, not a performer. She could feel the weight of everyone's expectations, or rather, their lack of expectations. When she reached the piano, she stood beside it for a moment, running her hand along its smooth edge. It was a beautiful instrument, a Steinway grand piano that probably cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. She'd walked past it hundreds of times during her shifts, had occasionally run a cloth over it when cleaning, but she'd never imagined actually playing it. She removed her apron, folding it carefully and placing it on a nearby chair. The action felt symbolic somehow, like she was shedding one identity and stepping into another. Without the apron, she was just a woman in a black dress standing next to a piano. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She pulled out the bench and sat down, adjusting her position until she felt centered and balanced. The bench was at the perfect height, the piano positioned just right. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and she could feel their smooth coolness even without touching them. From table 7, she heard a theatrical whisper, clearly meant to be overheard. Is she just going to sit there, or is something actually going to happen? Maybe she's forgotten how it works. More laughter, more mockery. Lisa closed her eyes and took a deep breath, blocking out their voices, blocking out the watching crowd, blocking out everything except the piano in front of her and the music in her heart. She thought about her mother again, about those early morning practice sessions before school, about the sacrifices that had been made so she could pursue her passion. She thought about her professors at Berkeley, who had told her she had something rare, something special. She thought about the concert halls she'd performed in, the competitions she'd won, the future that had seemed so bright before life got complicated. And she thought about these people at table 7, who had spent the entire evening trying to make her feel worthless, trying to convince her and everyone else that she was nothing more than a waitress, as if being a waitress was something to be ashamed of, as if the work she did, the service she provided, made her somehow less than human. But they didn't know her. They didn't know her story. They didn't know what she was capable of. They'd seen her apron and made assumptions, and those assumptions had made them cruel. It was time to show them who she really was. Not for revenge exactly, but for something more important. For her mother. For herself. For everyone who'd ever been judged by their circumstances rather than their character or their talents. Lisa opened her eyes, positioned her hands over the keys, and for the first time in 3 years, she let herself be a musician again. What happened in the next few moments would change everything. The question was whether she was ready for that change. The restaurant held its breath, waiting. Table 7 smirked, waiting for the embarrassment. And Lisa, for the first time all evening, smiled. A real smile, small and private, just for herself. Then she began to play. The first notes that came from the piano weren't tentative or uncertain. They were clear, confident, and absolutely beautiful. Lisa's fingers moved across the keys with a precision that came from years of training, thousands of hours of practice, and a deep, intimate understanding of music that couldn't be faked. She'd chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most technically demanding and emotionally powerful pieces in the classical repertoire. It wasn't a safe choice, wasn't something you played unless you knew exactly what you were doing. And within the first 30 seconds, everyone in the restaurant understood that Lisa knew exactly what she was doing. The music swelled and filled the space, transforming the restaurant into something more than just a dining room. It became a concert hall, a sacred space where art happened. The chandelier light seemed to shimmer in time with the notes. The very air felt different, charged with emotion and beauty. Lisa's hands moved with breathtaking speed and grace across the keys, her fingers dancing through complex runs and powerful chords. The piece demanded everything from a pianist: technical skill, emotional depth, physical endurance, and artistic interpretation. And Lisa delivered on every level. She poured everything into the music. 3 years of serving tables, of swallowing her pride, of putting her dreams on hold. 2 years of grief over her mother's death. A lifetime of being underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. All of it flowed through her fingers and into the piano, transformed into something transcendent. The guests sat frozen in their seats. Forks that had been halfway to mouths were lowered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working, gathering at the door to listen. This wasn't background music for a charity dinner. This was artistry of the highest level, the kind of performance you might hear in the finest concert halls of the world. At table 7, the smirks had disappeared. The blonde woman's mouth hung slightly open, her expression shifting from mockery to shock to something that looked almost like fear. Her husband had gone pale, his expensive whiskey forgotten in front of him. The other couple looked equally stunned, unable to reconcile what they were hearing with the waitress they'd been mocking all evening. The music built and swelled, moving through the concerto's famous melodies with power and delicacy in equal measure. Lisa's face was serene now, lost in the music, her body swaying slightly as she played. This was where she belonged, who she truly was beneath the uniform and the practiced customer service smile. An elderly man in the front of the room had tears streaming down his face. The kind woman from table 6 clutched her husband's hand, her own eyes glistening. Even the businessman who'd been checking his phone all evening had set it down, completely captivated. The piece moved through its dramatic crescendos and tender, quiet moments. Lisa's fingers found every note perfectly, her timing impeccable, her interpretation both technically brilliant and deeply moving. She wasn't just playing the notes on the page. She was telling a story, sharing her soul, communicating things that words could never capture. Midway through, she transitioned seamlessly into something else, something that made several people in the audience gasp softly. It was an original composition, something Lisa had written during her mother's final days in the hospital. She'd never performed it for anyone before. It had been too personal, too raw, but tonight felt like the right time. The melody carried both heartbreak and hope, loss and love, grief and gratitude. It spoke of sitting beside a hospital bed holding a hand that was growing weaker. It spoke of whispered conversations and unspoken goodbyes. It spoke of the pain of letting go and the beauty of having had someone worth missing. The music was devastatingly beautiful, honest in a way that most art never achieves. It demanded nothing from the listener except that they feel, really feel, without pretense or protection. And the audience responded. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the hardest, most cynical faces had softened, tears flowing freely. Lisa played with her eyes closed now, remembering. Her mother's laugh. Her mother's pride when Lisa had been accepted to Berkeley. Her mother's strength as she faced her illness. Her mother's final words, "Play for me, mija. Let the world hear what I hear." The original composition flowed back into classical repertoire, this time choosing something lighter, more hopeful. She moved into a stunning interpretation of Debussy, then surprised everyone with a jazz improvisation that showcased yet another dimension of her talent. She could do it all, move effortlessly between genres and styles, making the piano sing in ways that seemed almost impossible. Time seemed to stop. The evening's earlier tensions, the petty complaints, the cruelty of Table 7, all of it faded away in the face of something genuine and profound. This was what art was supposed to do. Not just entertain, but transform. Not just impress, but connect. Not just showcase skill, but reveal truth. As Lisa moved toward the conclusion of her performance, building to a final, powerful crescendo, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Her fingers flew across the keys in a cascade of notes that would have challenged any professional pianist. Yet she made it look effortless, natural, as if the music was simply flowing through her rather than being created by her. The final chord rang out, deep and resonant, filling every corner of the room. Then it faded slowly, gradually until there was nothing but silence. Complete, absolute silence. Lisa's hands remained on the keys for a moment, her head bowed, her breathing slightly quickened from the physical exertion of what she'd just accomplished. Then the silence shattered. The applause started with the elderly man in the front row, who shot to his feet so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Then the kind woman from table 6. Then the businessman. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was standing, applauding with a fervor that seemed to shake the chandelier overhead. It wasn't polite charity dinner applause. It was the kind of ovation usually reserved for the world's finest performers at the most prestigious venues. People were shouting "Brava" and "Magnificent." Their hands were red from clapping. Some were still wiping tears from their faces even as they applauded. Lisa stood slowly, turning to face the audience for the first time since she'd begun playing. She looked different somehow, not physically but in some intangible way. She stood taller. Her expression was calm, almost serene. The nervous waitress who'd approached the piano 15 minutes ago was gone. In her place stood an artist, someone who had just reminded herself and everyone else of who she truly was. She gave a small, graceful bow, acknowledging the applause with genuine humility. But her eyes were steady, confident. She'd proven something tonight, not just to the audience, but to herself. The elderly man who'd been first to his feet was now pushing his way through the crowd toward the piano. He moved with urgency, his face flushed with excitement. When he reached Lisa, he took both her hands in his. "Young lady," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm Daniel Rothstein. I'm the director of the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra. We've been searching for a new resident pianist for 8 months. 8 months of auditions, of listening to technically proficient but ultimately forgettable performances. And tonight, standing in a restaurant where I came for a charity dinner, I found exactly what I've been looking for." He was still holding her hands, looking at her with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. "You must audition for us, please. I'm not exaggerating when I say that what you just did was extraordinary. That level of technical skill combined with that emotional depth is incredibly rare. You have a gift, a real gift, and it deserves to be shared with the world." Before Lisa could respond, another voice called out. An elegant woman in her 60s, wearing a simple but clearly expensive navy dress, was making her way toward them. "Mr. Rothstein is absolutely right," she said, reaching the piano and smiling warmly at Lisa. "I'm Catherine Wells. I run the Harrison Foundation for the Arts. We provide grants to exceptional artists who need support to pursue their careers. What you just performed was nothing short of remarkable. I'd very much like to discuss our program with you." More people were crowding around now. A music critic from the city's largest newspaper, the dean of a prestigious music conservatory, the owner of a renowned concert venue. They all wanted to talk to her, to offer her opportunities, to be part of whatever came next for this extraordinary talent they'd just discovered. Mr. Peterson stood off to the side, tears running down his cheeks, his face split in a huge smile. He looked proud and happy and completely overwhelmed. Other staff members were hugging each other, celebrating this unexpected triumph for one of their own. And in the back of the room, at table 7, 4 people sat in absolute silence, their faces pale, their earlier arrogance completely deflated. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't smirking or making snide comments. They were simply sitting there, stunned and small, forced to confront the fact that they'd spent the entire evening mocking someone who possessed more talent, more grace, and more genuine worth than they might ever have. The blonde woman looked like she might be sick. Her husband stared at his plate. The other couple exchanged glances filled with shame and regret. They'd revealed themselves tonight, shown everyone exactly who they were, and now they had to live with that revelation. Lisa stood surrounded by people, her head spinning from the sudden attention and the flood of opportunities being offered to her. Daniel Rothstein was still talking about the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra, painting a picture of concert halls and recording contracts and international tours. Catherine Wells was describing grant programs and artist residencies. Others were pressing business cards into her hands, asking for her contact information, inviting her to auditions and meetings. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. For 3 years she'd been invisible, just another face in a service uniform, and now, suddenly, she was the center of attention, being treated like the artist she'd always dreamed of being but had almost stopped believing she could become. Through the crowd she saw table 7 beginning to gather their things. They were trying to leave quietly, hoping to slip out unnoticed in the commotion. The blonde woman had her purse clutched tightly, her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Her husband was already standing, clearly eager to escape. The other couple moved with the same urgency, desperate to put distance between themselves and their humiliation. But Mr. Peterson saw them too. He excused himself from the celebration happening around Lisa and moved swiftly to intercept them at their table. His expression, which had been joyful moments before, had turned cold and professional. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the noise. "Your bill." The blonde woman barely looked at him. "Just charge it to the card we gave you when we arrived. We need to leave." "I'm afraid that won't be quite enough," Mr. Peterson said. His voice was quiet but firm. "You see, I believe you owe someone an apology." The 4 of them froze. Around them, other conversations began to quiet as people realized what was happening. The restaurant's attention, which had been focused on celebrating Lisa, shifted to watch this confrontation. "I don't know what you're talking about," the blonde woman said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "We've paid for our meal. We're leaving." You spent this entire evening treating one of my staff members with contempt and cruelty, Mr. Peterson said, his words measured but powerful. You mocked her, belittled her, and did everything in your power to make her feel worthless. And then she stood up there and showed everyone in this room what she's truly capable of. So no, I don't think you're quite done here. The husband tried to bluster. Now see here, we're paying customers. We don't have to stand here and be lectured. You're right, Mr. Peterson interrupted. You don't have to stand here. But you do have to face what you did. And you should know that your behavior tonight was witnessed by everyone in this room. Your cruelty wasn't hidden or private. It was loud and public and everyone saw it. The dark-haired woman's face had gone red. We were just having a bit of fun. She's fine. Look at her, she's being celebrated. No thanks to you, said a voice from nearby. It was the kind elderly woman from table 6. She'd stood up, her own face flushed with anger. I watched you all evening. What you did wasn't having fun, it was bullying. It was cruel. And the fact that she rose above it and showed such grace and talent only makes your behavior more shameful. The businessman from table 8 nodded in agreement. I've never been more embarrassed to be in the same room with someone. You represented everything that's wrong with people who have money but no character. The blonde woman looked around, perhaps hoping for support, but found none. Every face looking back at her reflected the same disapproval, the same disgust. She'd thought the room would be on her side, that her wealth and status would shield her, but money meant nothing in the face of human decency, and she'd shown she had none. Lisa, still surrounded by her new admirers, gently excused herself and walked toward table 7. The crowd parted for her, and an expectant silence fell over the restaurant. Everyone wanted to see what she would do, what she would say to these people who had treated her so badly. She stopped a few feet from their table, standing tall and calm. The 4 of them looked at her with a mixture of shame, fear, and defiance. Up close, they looked smaller somehow, diminished by their own actions. I don't need an apology, Lisa said quietly. Her voice was gentle but clear, reaching every corner of the room. Honestly, I don't. Because nothing you say now could take back what you did tonight. Nothing could change who you showed yourselves to be. The blonde woman opened her mouth, perhaps to argue or defend herself, but Lisa continued. You looked at me and saw a waitress, just a waitress. And because of that, you decided I was less than you. Less worthy of respect, less worthy of basic human kindness. You made assumptions about my life, my intelligence, my worth as a person, all based on the fact that I serve food for a living. She paused, letting her words sink in. But here's what you didn't understand. There's no shame in being a waitress. There's no shame in any honest work. The only shame tonight belongs to people who think their money or status gives them the right to treat others as less than human. The dark-haired woman had tears in her eyes now. We didn't mean— Yes, you did, Lisa said, not unkindly but firmly. You meant every word, every sneer, every dismissive gesture. You enjoyed it. That's what makes it worse. You weren't just thoughtless. You were deliberate. She looked at each of them in turn. I learned something important tonight. I learned that I'd been hiding. Not just my talent, but myself. I let fear and circumstance convince me to play small, to be less than I could be. And in a strange way, your cruelty helped me remember who I really am, not despite the way you treated me, but maybe because of it. Lisa's expression softened slightly. So I'll tell you what I hope you learned tonight. I hope you learned that every person you meet has a story you can't see. Every single person has depths and talents and dreams that aren't visible on the surface. The server, the janitor, the cashier, the person you pass on the street, they all have rich, complex lives that you know nothing about. She turned to walk away, then paused and looked back. And I hope you learned that true worth has nothing to do with money or status or where you sit in a restaurant. It has everything to do with how you treat other people when you think no one important is watching, because everyone is important. Everyone matters, even the waitress. With that, she returned to the crowd of supporters, leaving table 7 standing in stunned silence. Around the restaurant, people began to applaud again. Not for her performance this time, but for her words, for the grace with which she'd handled a situation that would have justified anger or revenge. The 4 people at table 7 gathered their things and left quickly, their heads down, their earlier arrogance completely gone. As they pushed through the door into the night, several people in the restaurant actually booed. It was petty perhaps, but also somehow satisfying. Actions had consequences, And tonight they'd learned that lesson in the most public way possible. Mr. Peterson approached Lisa again, this time with a genuine smile. "I had no idea. In 3 years you never mentioned that you could play like that. You never asked," Lisa said with a small laugh. "And honestly, I'd almost convinced myself that part of my life was over. I needed the money more than I needed the music, or at least that's what I told myself. But tonight reminded me that we need both. We need to pay our bills and pursue our dreams. It doesn't have to be one or the other." Over the next hour, as the charity event continued, Lisa exchanged contact information with Daniel Rothstein, Catherine Wells, and a dozen other people who wanted to help her restart her music career. She scheduled an audition with the symphony orchestra for the following week. She learned about a grant program that could help cover her living expenses while she transitioned back to performing full-time. She was invited to give a solo concert at a prestigious venue. The opportunities were real and tangible, not just empty praise. Her life was about to change in ways she'd stopped allowing herself to imagine. 3 months later, Lisa walked onto the stage of the city's most famous concert hall, this time not in a server's uniform but in an elegant gown. Her hair styled beautifully, her hands steady and ready. The Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra sat behind her, and the hall was filled to capacity with people who had come to hear the pianist everyone was talking about, the one who'd been discovered serving tables at a charity dinner. The story had made the local news, then social media, then national media. People loved it. The underdog narrative, the satisfying reversal, the reminder that talent and worth aren't always visible on the surface. Lisa had given interviews talking not just about her music but about her journey, about the struggles of pursuing art while needing to survive, about the importance of treating everyone with dignity regardless of their job or station in life. The reviews of that first concert were extraordinary. Critics called her performance transcendent, deeply moving, and technically flawless. Ticket sales for her subsequent concerts broke records. Recording studios reached out. International venues extended invitations, but Lisa kept one night a week free. Every Friday evening she returned to the Sterling Rose not as a performer, but as a server. She'd slip on her apron and take orders and bring food to tables, just like she'd done for 3 years. Mr. Peterson had tried to argue against it, told her she didn't need to do that anymore, but Lisa insisted. "This work has dignity," she told him. "This work matters, and I never want to forget that, or to let anyone think I'm ashamed of having done it. Besides, this place and these people helped me when I needed it most. Why would I leave?" So she worked one shift a week and word got around. People would specifically request to sit in her section, not because she was famous now, but because they wanted to be served by someone who understood that every job, every person, every moment mattered, and she never forgot the lesson of that night. Every person she served, she looked them in the eye and treated them with genuine warmth and respect. And when people were rude to other servers, she wasn't afraid to politely but firmly remind them that kindness costs nothing and means everything.